When I was 10 years old, most kids my age were arguing with their parents about bedtime or begging for the latest video game. Me, I was standing in line at the utility office, holding a crumpled check in my sweaty hands, praying they wouldn't shut off our lights before I could pay. The cashier gave me that look, the one adults give kids who are way too young to be doing grown-up things. "Where are your parents, sweetheart?" she asked. I forced a smile, the kind of smile a child shouldn't know how to fake. "At home," I lied, but the truth. They were passed out on the couch, an empty vodka bottle on the floor, and another notice from the landlord tacked to the door. From the age of 12, I wasn't just their daughter. I was their provider. Most mornings, I packed my own lunch before school, not peanut butter and jelly like the other kids, but whatever was left in the fridge after Mom's binges and Dad's gambling nights. If there was nothing, I just told my stomach to stay quiet until dinner. I'd clock into my part-time job at the corner store after school, stocking shelves, mopping sticky floors, counting coins like they were treasure. My paycheck, it never lasted. By the time I cashed it, my father had already sniffed it out like a bloodhound, claiming he needed just a little for bills. I knew better. Bills didn't smell like cheap whiskey. At 14, I stopped fighting him. Instead, I opened a secret savings account. I'd slip in $20 here, $40 there, hiding it from the people who were supposed to hide the world's cruelty from me. One night, I remember coming home and finding my mom on the kitchen floor, sobbing. She'd been taken to the hospital again for alcohol poisoning. The bill was almost $2,000. I signed the paperwork myself, my scrawny hand trembling as I scrawled my name in block letters. I was a kid, but the hospital staff didn't question me. Maybe they saw the exhaustion in my eyes and thought, "She's been doing this for a long time." And they were right. By the time I hit 16, I wasn't dreaming about prom dresses or driver's licenses. I was calculating rent, gas money, and whether I could keep us afloat another month. I worked 2 jobs. I slept 4 hours a night, and still, my parents called me ungrateful when I didn't hand over every dime. Ungrateful for keeping them alive, for paying the bills they ignored, for holding the family together with my bare, bleeding hands. People talk about childhood as the golden years. For me, childhood was a ledger of debts and lies. I wasn't a daughter. I was their parent. That reversal broke me in ways I didn't even understand until years later. It stole my innocence, my trust, my belief that parents are supposed to protect their kids. And yet, I survived. I studied late at night between shifts. I graduated. I clawed my way into college with scholarships no one helped me apply for. And by 26, I finally had my own apartment, my own job, my own life. For the first time ever, the roof over my head was mine. Paid for by me, not a 12-year-old with a mop, not a 16-year-old with dark circles under her eyes, but me, an adult who had rebuilt herself from the ruins of her own childhood. I thought I was free. I thought the nightmare was over, until the knock on my door one evening. I opened it and there they were, my parents, smiling, carrying suitcases. "Baby girl," my father said as if nothing had happened. "We're home." The sight of them standing there froze me. It had been nearly a decade since I'd seen their faces in person. My father's hair had gone gray at the edges, but his eyes still carried that same sharp hunger, the kind that never looked at me with love, only with need. My mother wore a faded coat, her lipstick smeared as if she'd applied it in a gas station bathroom. They looked older, weaker, but their smiles were the same, smiles that always came right before they asked for something. I stood in the doorway, blocking their entrance. "What are you doing here?" My voice was flat, stripped of the tremble it once had when I was a child. My father chuckled, like I'd just made a silly joke. "What do you mean, we're your parents?" He gestured to the suitcases at his feet. "We thought it was time to, be a family again." Family, that word hit me like a punch. My mother sniffled, clutching her purse. "We've missed you, sweetheart. We've been through so much, but we're better now. We're ready to step back into your life." I wanted to laugh or scream or slam the door in their faces. Instead, I asked the one question that burned in my chest. "Why now?" My father's smile faltered for just a second before he recovered. "You're doing well for yourself. We heard about your new job, the apartment. We're proud of you, baby girl." He emphasized proud like it was a gift I should be grateful for. And then he said the words that made my stomach turn. "Of course, as your parents, we think it's only right we help guide you. You shouldn't have to carry all this burden alone. You need us to manage things for you. That's what family does." I stared at him, barely breathing. Was he serious? They hadn't lifted a finger to raise me, hadn't put food in my mouth or a roof over my head. I was the one keeping them alive. And now, suddenly, they wanted to swoop back in and manage my life. I didn't move aside, so my mother tried another tactic. She reached out, her hand trembling. "Please, honey, we made mistakes, yes, but we're still your mom and dad. You can't change that. Nothing you've built belongs to anyone else but us, too. We created you. We deserve to be here." That word deserve rang in my ears like a siren. Deserve. Did they deserve the nights I cried myself to sleep alone? The exhaustion carved into my teenage face. The childhood they robbed me of, bill by bill, bruise by bruise. I swallowed hard, forcing back the flood of memories threatening to choke me. "You left me," I said quietly. "You left me to raise myself, to raise you, and now you think you can just claim me again, claim everything I've built." My father's eyes narrowed, his smile finally cracking. "Don't talk to me like that. I'm your father. Without me, you wouldn't even exist." He jabbed his finger toward me like a gavel. "And that means you owe us." Oh, that was it. The mask slipped and the truth came out. They weren't here for family. They were here for a payout. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed steady. "I don't owe you anything." The silence after those words was heavier than any scream. My mother's face twisted, half crying, half accusing. "How can you say that after everything we sacrificed?" I cut her off. "Sacrificed? You sacrificed me, my childhood, my safety, my peace. Don't stand here and rewrite history." But my father wasn't backing down. He dropped the smile completely now, his voice hard and ugly. "You think the world will side with you? You think anyone will believe a child raised herself? We're your parents. Legally, biologically, spiritually. We can fight this. We will fight this, and you'll lose." He said it with such conviction that for the first time in years, I felt the ghost of that terrified little girl I used to be. The girl who cowered at his voice, who obeyed every command, who believed every threat. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I straightened my shoulders, my hand tightening on the doorknob. "You already lost." And then I shut the door. I stood there, heart pounding, listening as they banged and shouted on the other side. My father's voice thundered, my mother's cries pierced the wood. But I didn't open it again. Still, when the hallway finally went quiet, when their footsteps faded, I slid down against the door, shaking, because I knew this wasn't over. People like them never just walk away. And deep down, I understood something chilling. They weren't here to ask for love or forgiveness. They were here to take, and they wouldn't stop until they tried to take everything. After they left my doorstep that night, I sat in silence for hours. Every word they said, every threat, every smile that wasn't really a smile, it cracked something open inside me. And the memories came flooding back. I was 9 when the first eviction notice showed up. A bright orange paper slapped on our front door like a scarlet letter. I remember tracing the words with my finger, mouthing them slowly. Failure to pay. I didn't even know what failure meant back then, but I knew the way the neighbors stared. I knew the shame of watching my father rip it down and crumple it like it was nothing, then stumble back inside with a six-pack under his arm. That night, I counted the coins in my piggy bank and tried to calculate if I could save us. I was 9. At 11, I learned how to forge a signature. The school wouldn't let me go on the field trip without a parent's approval. My mom was in bed. shaking from withdrawal, my dad missing for 3 days. So I practiced their handwriting until the pen felt like a knife in my hand. I got to go on that trip, but instead of enjoying it, I kept staring at the form in my backpack, terrified someone would find out. At 13, I called 911 for the first time. My father had collapsed in the living room, his skin pale, lips blue. The operator's voice asked me, "Is there an adult with you?" I almost laughed, almost. "No," I whispered. "It's just me." When the ambulance came, they asked who would handle the hospital paperwork. My mother was too drunk to stand, so I signed. A 13-year-old girl authorizing her own father's treatment. The bill came weeks later, thick and heavy. I picked up extra shifts at the corner store, scrubbing sticky soda off tile floors. My hands blistered raw. I didn't tell a soul. Who would have believed me anyway? By 15, I had a filing cabinet hidden in my closet. Receipts, bank slips, overdue notices, medical bills. Proof. Evidence. I didn't think of it that way back then. I just wanted to keep track of everything to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. But in truth, I was building a record, a silent archive of every crime they committed against my childhood. I still remember one paper most of all, a rehab admission form. The box for responsible party bore my name. Age, 15, relationship, daughter, payment method, cash, 2 years of savings from sweeping floors and bagging groceries. I kept that paper, I still have it. And the cruelest part, through all of it, they never once said thank you. Not once. Instead, they called me ungrateful when I dared to hide money. They accused me of being selfish if I didn't hand over every paycheck. Ungrateful, selfish, disrespectful. That was the chorus of my childhood. But the truth was simple. I wasn't their child. I was their parent. I was their caretaker, their provider, their shield against a world they created but couldn't handle. Now, as I sat in my own apartment, their threats still ringing in my ears, I opened the old metal box tucked in the back of my closet. The same box I'd carried from place to place, across every move, every dorm, every tiny studio. Inside were the files, the receipts, the bills, the evidence of my stolen childhood. I spread them across the table, one by one, like cards in a rigged game. And for the first time, I didn't see them as memories. I saw them as weapons, because if my parents wanted to drag me into court, I was ready. A week after that knock on my door, a thick white envelope arrived. No return address, just my name typed in bold letters. Inside was a summons. I was being sued by my own parents. The words blurred as I read them. Petition for parental rights. Request for financial support. Claim of dependents' share. They weren't just asking to be back in my life. They were demanding it. Legally. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one I'd worked so hard to buy, and stared at the papers. My hands shook, not with fear, but with something hotter. Anger. My parents had done nothing to raise me. I raised them. I had the scars, the bills, the sleepless nights to prove it. And yet here they were, twisting the law into a weapon, insisting that because they were my biological parents, they had a right to everything I'd built. I couldn't help but hear my father's voice echoing from that night at the door. "Without us, you wouldn't even exist. That means you owe us." Now it was written in black and white. He wanted not just my forgiveness, but my bank account. He wanted control. My mother's affidavit was attached, shaky handwriting scrawled across lined paper. "We sacrificed our lives for her. She wouldn't be where she is without us. We deserve compensation." Sacrificed. The word nearly made me laugh. Their sacrifice was me signing eviction notices at 9 years old, me begging strangers for shifts to pay medical bills, me hiding cash in duct-taped shoeboxes so my father wouldn't drink it away. But this wasn't just a family fight anymore. This was a legal war. They had a lawyer, some slick man in a gray suit who thought family law meant twisting guilt into gold. The petition stated that my parents sought guardianship rights over me, even though I was 26. They claimed I was financially reckless and emotionally unstable, that they needed to step in as my rightful caretakers. Caretakers. The word made bile rise in my throat. I met with my own attorney, a woman named Harris who had fire in her eyes the moment she scanned the documents. She looked at me and said, "This isn't about custody. This is about control, and they're counting on you to break." Break. The way I used to break as a child, but not this time. Still, the fear crept in at night. What if the court sided with them? What if all my hard work could be stripped away because of a title parent that they had never earned? I pulled the metal box from my closet again, spreading out the old papers across my bed. Eviction notices, hospital bills, rehab receipts, evidence, proof that I had been the adult all along. As I looked at each one, I realized something. My childhood hadn't just been a tragedy. It had been a record, a case file, and now it was going to be my defense. The trial date was set. My parents were ready to stand in front of a judge and declare that everything I had belonged to them. But what they didn't know was this. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of them. I was ready. The night before the first court hearing, my apartment looked like a war room. Papers, folders, receipts, scattered across the floor like battle plans. Every eviction notice I signed as a child, every hospital bill under my name, every rehab admission slip where I had written, in shaky teenage handwriting, responsible party, daughter. For years, these documents had been my shame. Now they were my ammunition. But then I found something I had forgotten. At the bottom of the metal box was an envelope yellowed with age. No return address. Just my name scrawled across the front in my mother's handwriting. I slid it open and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The words on it made my skin crawl. It was a contract. My parents had sold my social security number, my identity, to cover a gambling debt when I was 15. They'd signed it away to a payday lender, leaving me with destroyed credit before I was even old enough to vote. I remembered that year, the strange calls, the letters I never understood. And now, here was the truth in black ink. My parents had stolen not just my childhood, but my future. My hands shook as I held the paper. This wasn't just proof of neglect. This was fraud, a crime. They had spent years convincing me I was selfish and ungrateful, but the truth was written right here. They had fed on me like parasites. They weren't parents, they were predators. The next morning, I walked into my lawyer's office with the contract in hand. Attorney Harris scanned the document, her eyes widening. "This," she said slowly, "isn't just evidence. This is a weapon. If they push this case, we'll countersue. Not only will they lose their claim, they could face criminal charges." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the weight shift. For the first time, I wasn't the child cornered by two towering shadows. I was the one holding the light. In court, my parents strutted in with their lawyer, smug and certain. My father winked at me like we were playing a game he'd already won. My mother dabbed fake tears with a tissue, whispering loud enough for the gallery to hear. "We only want what's fair." Fair. If only the judge knew what fair had meant in our house. When the judge asked if I had anything to present, I rose. My voice didn't shake. I placed the stack of papers on the stand, one by one. Eviction notices, medical bills, rehab slips, and finally the contract. The courtroom went silent as I explained how my parents had sold my identity, shackling me with debt before I was even grown. My father's smirk evaporated. My mother's hand froze in mid-dab, the tissue dropping to her lap. Their lawyer stammered, flipping through the papers as if he could erase the ink with panic. The judge's eyes darkened. "This," he said, tapping the contract, "changes everything." And in that moment, I knew the tide had turned. Because the truth wasn't just my defense, it was my justice. The courtroom smelled of old wood and ink, the kind of place where lives could be dismantled or rebuilt with a single sentence. I sat at the defendant's table, palms pressed flat against the grainy surface. Across from me, my parents leaned in close to their attorney, whispering like conspirators. My father glanced up and smirked. My mother gave me a look halfway between pity and scorn, as though I were still that terrified little girl they could bend and break at will. But this time I didn't flinch. The judge entered. "All rise." We stood, and when we sat again, the war began. Their lawyer painted a tragic picture, two parents who had struggled, who had sacrificed everything to raise a difficult child. He described me as reckless, ungrateful, and in need of guidance. Every word was a knife aimed to carve me down to size, and then it was my turn. I rose, clutching the folder of evidence. My voice didn't shake. "Your Honor," I began, "my parents are asking this court to recognize them as caretakers, to grant them rights over my life, my income, and my future. But the truth is, they were never my caretakers. I was theirs." I laid out the papers one by one. The eviction notice I paid at 9 years old. The hospital bill I signed at 13. The rehab receipt in my name at 15. Each document landed on the table with a soft slap, echoing louder than any shout. My parents shifted in their seats. My mother's lips pressed thin, my father's jaw clenched. "And this," I said finally, holding up the contract, "is proof that when I was still a minor, they sold my identity to pay off a gambling debt. They didn't protect me. They profited from me." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, his brow heavy with disbelief and anger. My parents' lawyer stammered, trying to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Then my father exploded. "This is nonsense," he barked. "We gave her life. Without us, she'd have nothing. She owes us." The word echoed through the room, owes, the same word that had haunted my childhood. I stepped closer, my eyes locking on his. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I don't owe you. You owed me a childhood. You owed me safety. You owed me love, and you gave me nothing." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even my mother stopped pretending to cry. The judge's gavel came down, sharp and final. "Petition denied," he declared. "Furthermore, given the evidence presented, this court recommends investigation into potential fraud and abuse by the petitioners." The color drained from my parents' faces. For once, they were speechless. As I gathered my papers, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. Not completely, scars don't vanish in a day, but in that courtroom, I wasn't the child begging for scraps of love. I was the adult who had survived. The one who had turned their lies into proof. The one who, for the first time, had the final word. I turned to them, calm and steady, and spoke the sentence I'd been carrying my whole life. "I was never your child. I was your parent, and now I'm free." And with that, I walked out. The courthouse doors shut behind me with a heavy thud, but to me it sounded like freedom. For years, I had carried their voices inside my head, the accusations, the guilt, the endless refrain of "you owe us." But in that moment, the echo finally died. Inside, the judge's words still hung in the air like a verdict written in stone. Petition denied. Investigation recommended. For the first time in my life, the law wasn't a weapon against me. It was a shield. My parents didn't walk out of that courtroom triumphant. They were escorted out, faces pale, whispers following them like shadows. Their lawyer refused to meet their eyes. The Predator Act had collapsed, leaving them exposed for what they really were, two broken people who had tried to drain me dry. And now, instead of holding power over me, they faced consequences of their own making. Fraud, abuse, neglect. Words they had once buried beneath manipulation were now stamped on their record for the world to see. I wish I could say I felt joy in their downfall, but the truth was quieter than that. I felt release, like a knot in my chest had finally come undone after 20 years of tightening. That night, I went home and opened the metal box one last time. The papers that once felt like chains now looked different. They weren't just evidence of pain, they were proof of survival. I slid them back inside, locked the box, and tucked it deep in the back of my closet. Not because I wanted to hide them again, but because I didn't need them anymore. They weren't my burden now. They were my story, my truth. Weeks later, I found myself in a park on a quiet evening. Children were laughing on the swings, their parents close by, pushing them higher, steadying them when they slipped. I watched with a mix of sadness and wonder. That was what childhood was supposed to look like, what mine never had. And yet, I wasn't bitter, not anymore, because I realized something simple, something powerful. I couldn't rewrite my past, but I could write my future. The little girl who once counted coins in the dark had grown into a woman who could stand in the light. The teenager who signed hospital papers for her parents now signed contracts for her own career. The child who thought she had no one now knew she had herself. And that was enough. As the sun dipped low, I whispered into the air, not for them but for me. I was never your child, I was your parent, but from now on I belong to myself. And for the first time in my life, I felt the word free settle into my bones. A month later, I drove back to the old neighborhood. The house where I grew up was still there, sagging under years of neglect. The paint peeled, the yard overgrown, the same cracked window in the kitchen. Time hadn't fixed it. Nobody had. I parked across the street and just stared. That house had been my prison. The walls had heard every fight, soaked up every tear. It was where I'd learned that parents could abandon you even while sitting in the same room. But now I saw it for what it really was, just wood and brick. It had no power over me anymore. I stepped out of the car and walked up to the gate. The mailbox still bore our family name, rusted and faded. My hand hovered over it for a moment, and then I pulled a key from my pocket. Not the key to that house. The key to my own apartment, the one I'd earned, the one I'd built. I dropped it into the mailbox with a soft clang. A symbol that I no longer carried their weight, that my future belonged only to me. As I turned to leave, a gust of wind swept down the street, rattling the broken shutters, carrying dust and dead leaves into the air. I didn't look back, because for the first time in my life, I didn't need to. Closing voiceover line. Some children inherit homes. I inherited ruins. But I learned something stronger than blood. You can be your own parent. You can set yourself free.